Dice, yeah, ay, ay.
Some guests arrive with a story that feels heavy, and yet somehow they carry it with so much clarity, gentleness, and grounded wisdom that you can't help but feel lighter and just listening. Today's guest, psychotherapist and author Phyllis Leavitt, is exactly that kind of presence. Phyllis spent over 30 years helping people heal their deepest wounds, but what makes her special is that she walked that healing path herself. She grew up feeling like an outsider in her own skin, sensing a mystery inside her that she couldn't quite name, until memories from early childhood began to surface decades later. And yet her journey wasn't defined by darkness. It was shaped by poetry, nature, spiritual moments that cracked her open, and a life force inside her that refused to stay quiet. In this episode, we talk about trauma, but also about connection. The weird way we try to look okay, the beauty of real healing, and the incredible power of learning to relearn the people we love. If you've ever felt like something inside you wanted to come out, or if you've ever wondered why you behave the way you do, or why certain patterns repeat in families and even in society, this conversation will give you a fresh, uplifting perspective. This is FYI, I Am Damaged, where the healed, healing, and others share their wisdom. Meet Logan, the strong minded little elephant who learns that bravery isn't about being fearless, it's about believing in yourself even when you're scared. In this beautifully illustrated story, friends follow Logan through a colorful jungle as he learns to calm his worries, take deep breaths, and remind himself, I am strong, I am safe, I can do this. It's a story that helps kids, and maybe a few grown-ups too, find courage, mindfulness, and strength in their hearts. Logan, the strong-minded little elephant, by me, Oscar Luna. Available now at all major retailers and my publisher's bookstore, Milton and Hugo. Because it's up to every parent to show that their child deserves to know that strength starts from within. So, Phyllis, you spent over 30 years as a psychotherapist and have gone through your own profound healing journey. Can you share what inspired your earliest steps on the path to personal and spiritual transformation?
Yeah, pain. Pain is a big motivator, I think, for a lot of people. Really feeling like a mystery to myself, feeling like there was something intrinsically wrong with me and I couldn't figure out what it was, feeling like I never fit in anywhere, like I was, just that. I think that feeling of inner isolation that I think a lot of people experience as a result of trauma from other people. And for me, I didn't remember what happened to me because it happened so early in life. And those memories didn't start coming back until I was in my 30s. So my younger years were I was kind of a mystery to myself. And I always felt like there was something that wanted to come out, in terms of not necessarily the memories at that point, but like that I had a life force that was suppressed and I didn't know how to release it. And one of the ways that I did find, I think through God's grace, was that I really wanted to write. And I was very drawn to writing poetry and writing little pieces of experience. And that helped me connect to my inner world. So I knew that there was that place inside of me. Writing kind of became my passion. And then I also had some very profound spiritual experiences in nature in particular that showed me that there was divine love out there, that there was love possible, that there was a feeling of wholeness and warmth and connection. And connection may be the most important word because I felt so disconnected from what had happened to me. And then, those were very special moments, but they didn't really color my whole life. And I joined a spiritual group when I was young. I got married. I had 3 little children, and my world kind of just fell apart, which I think is what happens for people. And it was really a healing crisis, and I think that's an important thing to know, that sometimes when you just hit rock bottom, it's really because you're ready to heal. And I went to therapy is what I did. And I was starting to have memories before I went to therapy. And then when I went to therapy, I I found a safe place to really process some of the pain that was so repressed, and had the blessed opportunity to release some of that. So that's really it. And I think pain is a big motivator. And I think that we live in a culture that really, in some ways, whether it's overt or not, teaches people to repress it and hide it and look good and pretend like they're okay, because that's how we think we're going to fit in, by looking okay. Just exactly like you said, like there's a wall of pain behind the surface. And what I've discovered, and I know myself as both the client and years of being a therapist working with lots and lots of trauma, is that it takes courage, it takes strength, and it's an incredible thing to move through the trauma and come out the other side, and that we can hold that space for each other.
Absolutely. And yeah, the thing you were mentioning was our little talk before we started recording, that just letting you know how I came into my podcast and my
Right.
trauma and everything. And it's given me a different perspective on people and what they go through, and how you would think someone would advocate for themselves and want to see a better situation, and yet you don't see them act on it, and no one realizes that that's an internal battle.
Mm.
And that's one thing I would just love to have turn around in people. And I've seen it myself, I've been through it myself, and still going through it. And it's something that's when you're there to witness it, because even then I had two of my brothers there with me, Will and Kevin, who were when I did my release, and they looked and they were like, wow. To the point where one of them said, because they were working on their own thing too, we went on a retreat. He was like, wow. He's like, I know somebody who I need them to go through this, and I hope they have the release that you had. And
I think we live in a culture that still carries a lot of shame around expressing your pain. And shame is a very, very painful emotion by itself. And I think that's one of the reasons why I know that I tried to hide my pain for a really long time, because it felt shameful. And it's not, it's not. It's a normal response to being hurt. So, yeah. And you're very fortunate that you had that kind of love in your family. And I think one of the blessings of going through it is that it really builds compassion for yourself and for other people.
yeah, that shame, and the shame is a big component, and people worry about what other people think. And when you finally release, even if you don't release your trauma and you release that, I don't have to worry about what people think, it's a huge thing. A huge thing. Your work bridges psychology, family systems, and spirituality. Was there a moment when these threads first came together in your life or practice?
Well, they were kind of separate for a long time. I think I think the psychological piece of recovering from trauma was sort of its own thing. And yet, because I had had spiritual experiences growing up that just kind of came to me, that was also a very deep calling. But I saw them as two separate worlds. And I don't think they really are, but I saw them that way. And, nobody talked about spirituality when I was growing up. And then I was kind of a child of the 60s, and it was a big thing in the United States where I was anyway. And I joined different spiritual groups, and I tried different spiritual practices, and they were all good. And I'll tell you, the moment where I think they began to come together was, and it's a very distinct moment in my memory. I was talking to a friend who was in the spiritual group that I was in, and he was talking about, he had turned to an Indian guru at that time, and he was talking about how he was learning Hindu or some, it's a foreign language, and he had these beads that he was meditating with. And he was very sincere, and he was a lovely person. But when I listened to him talk, I heard something in myself. And what I saw was he's just desperate to be loved by God. And what I saw in myself was I was sort of the same way, but it was really because I didn't feel love with human beings, with other people. And at that moment, I knew I had to go heal something, because it was really human love that I wanted. I wanted to give and receive love in a way that I hadn't known it. And that's really was a turning point for me. And it really brought those worlds in the beginning stages of coming together.
I know connection is a big part. I know it's and not to put her on the spot like my wife, it's a big thing for her. And I don't know that, no. I know it's a big thing for her, and it's I'm noticing it's a big thing for a lot of people, and it sort of like helps regulate them, having connection, community, and all that. And that's the older I get, I see how more important it is.
Yes.
I grew up with those older individuals who never had connections and then they shun society and then they're negative. Even people who are not so old, you know.
Well, we're born wired for love and connection. Even science says that to us now. And I think that's really true. We're wired for love and connection. And when we don't have it, it's an injury. It's an injury. And then we develop defenses against the pain of not feeling connected. And that's what I did. And, you know, for some people, their defenses are highly destructive. It might be drugs and alcohol. It might be becoming highly aggressive or totally withdrawn from society, or just you can't keep a job, or you can't keep a relationship, or you become abusive. For me, it was mostly withdrawal and a lot of self-criticism, just unending self-criticism, which is horrible. It's like repeating the trauma in a different way on yourself. And I think one of the beauties of having an opportunity to heal is that you get to work through the defenses that you took on. And we do that, you know, because we're just trying to survive. Even our worst defenses we're just trying to make it. And then there's a possibility of freedom from that and really living a life where you don't need those defenses because you feel a connection to your own heart and soul.
That's very vital, because I did work with someone who really didn't take care of themselves, and you know, just talking, you know, and how they express and talk about their life, and they acted out with pessimism, with negativity, with judgment, and you look at the person, you're like, why? What's going on? Like, why is everything always leaning to the negative, and, you know, half the glass is half full type of outlook? And it got draining after a while, and then you see why okay, people would talk about you, and then people would talk behind his back and would just act negatively towards him, thinking, okay, it's okay to, you know, fight fire with fire. When you see somebody like, oh my God, you know, you're a traumatized person, but
Right.
you're not ready to heal yet. Writing A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire was both personal and spiritual for you. What was most surprising or challenging about sharing your healing process so publicly?
Well, it took me a long time to do that because my spiritual journey was so personal. I really began to hear divine guidance when I was writing in my journal, and that's what happened for me. And I think that was intimately related to releasing some of the memories. And it was really a surprise for me. I wasn't looking for that. I didn't know anybody who did that, but the messages were so profoundly loving and deep and wise. And they were really about our souls took on this journey for a reason and not for punishment. It's not like we did bad things in a past life and now karma is catching up with us and now we have to suffer what we did to somebody else 100 years ago or whatever. It was never anything like that. In fact, I don't believe that. It was really like this is the human journey, to live in this separation consciousness. And the human journey is to actually evolve our consciousness out of that to a place of wholeness and oneness with spirit and with ourselves and with our fellow man. So it was very grounded. It wasn't like an airy-fairy or woo-woo, anything. It was very grounded in how we live and how do we become that love for ourselves and for other people. And what are the things that keep us in this separation consciousness and how can we work with them? So the guidance that I received was really, from the beginning, it felt like it was for me and for anybody who was, you know, open to that kind of guidance. It wasn't just personal. And it was really another dimension on top of the healing that I did in therapy setting. It added a whole other layer of really just profound love and giving it meaning. Like, not just that you survived and came out the other side, but there was a purpose. And I'll tell you, one of the purposes for me, and I think there were many, besides the actual writing that I did in A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire and the messages that I shared about how our ego consciousness works,
Right.
was that it really allowed me the freedom to, in my work with other people, to go really deep. I wasn't afraid of their pain. I wasn't afraid of their trauma I knew there was light on the other side.
And is there any in particular moment that stands out?
In terms of what particular?
Helping individuals in your way?
Well, there were I've worked with a lot of trauma, and there is a lot of trauma in our society. There's a lot of sexual abuse. There's a lot of physical violence in homes. There's a lot of addiction. There's a lot of abandonment. A lot more than I think most people either know or would like to know behind closed doors what happens. And I'll just name one particular client that not their name, but one particular client that I worked with for a very long time who had the absolute worst abuse history that, it was hard to believe, except I know it was true. And her own journey of being, I feel like I was able to meet her where she was because I had gone through it myself. Not the same things that she had experienced, because everybody has a different story. But we just hung out with it for really one moment at a time while she recovered different memories and different parts of herself. And when she moved through that, and I held the light for her because I knew it was possible. And I'm not patting myself on the back here. I'm just saying I knew it was possible. And I really needed that myself when I was going through it, somebody to actually tell me, which I didn't really have, to say there is light possible on the other side, because I really didn't know that. And I felt like just being able to hold that for her, no matter what she felt, because she felt like I did, like I'll never make it through this. She made the most profound spiritual connection herself. And this was someone who couldn't even say the word love when I first met her. And she made the most profound spiritual connection and became, just a different human being by the time we, went through our work together. And I think that's really possible. And it doesn't mean everybody's going to make a spiritual connection. And that doesn't have to be the goal. It's becoming connected to your true self, however that wants to manifest.
And I think honestly, you should pat yourself on the back, even if it's lightly, because it's not something very easy to, in a sense, hold somebody's water. It's very difficult on the person just listening, and as well as for the person expressing. And that takes a special talent. I think you should be proud of that.
Well, thank you. And the way that I always say it to myself, and I appreciate your saying that, is that it was just as much of an honor and a blessing for me to be able to work with her and with the people that I've worked with over the years. And when people would say, this was so great, or thank you, I would say, we did this together, because it's a together thing. You don't heal somebody. You provide a space the best you can for them to find the healing that is in there in themselves. The doctor has certain knowledge so that you can't heal your own body. They have a certain knowledge, but on another level, you participate in that.
Yeah, I can agree, because even for myself, like when somebody compliments me on the episode, oh, I got this, I got that, I took this from that, like it lightens my day. Like I love it,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it's the reason we're doing it, to help others. I don't know who that's the thing, is like, who you're helping there in front of you. I don't know who I'm helping. And I hope I'm helping somebody. And if I do, and then they express it, I wish people love writing comments more, because then, it'll be great to see that.
Right.
But when someone does speak up, and I'm like, man, that's great. Like that's what I'm aiming for. And
Totally.
it kind of juices the battery a little bit. In your latest book, America in Therapy, you talk about applying psychological healing to society as a whole. What led you to believe that our nation needs therapy now more than ever?
Well, many things. I think all we have to do is listen to the news, probably, and 100 things hit you in the face about why we need therapy. I see all groupings of people as families, because all groupings of people operate on family dynamics, and they're either healthy family dynamics and loving and supportive, and they have good boundaries, and there's providing for each other, there's good skills around conflict resolution. And again, no family is perfect, but in a healthy family, you have more of that than not. And in an unhealthy family, you have abuse, you have neglect, you have targeting of certain people, you have blaming of people for their symptoms, you have punishing people for speaking out and telling the truth and trying to get help. And we see all those dysfunctional and abusive dynamics happening on the largest levels of society, coming from the top down as well as in individual families. And I felt like I needed to write about that because I don't think that's common knowledge. I don't think the average person has psychological training because it's not part of, ordinary education unless you choose that for yourself. And I think we still live in a society, even though I think there's some progress, I think we still live in a society that blames our victims and for their symptoms. And that's exactly what happens in an abusive family or a neglectful household, that people are blamed for their symptoms that are the natural outcome of being hurt by other human beings. And I think also as a society, we really don't understand that inside the perpetrator is an unhealed victim. And if we really want to stop this cycle of violence and divisiveness and discrimination and exploitation and greed and withholding resources from large parts of our population, we have to really treat abuse on all levels, on the family level, on the societal level, on the institutional level, in education, in business, in our churches and synagogues. And because I also, and this is one piece that I really became aware of as a therapist, is that people are really being, and of course I know this myself and with the people that are friends, we're being traumatized in our own homes by what we see happening around us, even if it's not happening to us.
So in like a passive way?
Well, so one of the things that I experienced as a therapist, which was really a helpful insight, was that for some of my clients, they weren't abused themselves in their home, but a sibling was, or a parent was. And that was traumatizing for them. The helplessness around being able to protect somebody they love, or watching someone being beaten, or knowing that they were being molested and you couldn't do anything about it. That helplessness is actually a trauma to our psyches. And we're all witnessing many parts of our population today being hurt, being targeted, being exploited, being discriminated against, and being assaulted, physically, verbally, assaulted. And when the 2016 election was happening, that whole cycle was happening, that was the first time in my practice that I ever had a client come and need to process the trauma they were feeling about what was going on in our country. Lying awake at night, not being able to sleep, terrified about what the election results were going to be, and then terrified about the election results. And so what I saw was happening in individual families where people couldn't protect others in their family was happening on a broad scale. And so I just felt like for all those reasons and more that are in my book, I needed to write about that because I didn't see that anywhere.
That's a great perspective and an excellent point. And to add, it's funny you mentioned that of how people are being traumatized in a sort of roundabout way. And I also think that, we're in a sense healing backwards because we didn't have all this mental health focus so long ago, even recently.
Right.
And, all the older individuals who are seeking therapy or who have gained the strength to say, you know what, I want to do something for myself. I want to heal. And, we're essentially, I put this in another interview where someone was interviewing me about what I went through. And I said, I come from parents who are traumatized. And, we have to start healing, and we are healing backwards. Those who are fortunate enough to still be living, to have access to such resources and start using them. Okay, now we're healing the past generations that want to heal, can heal, and are curious about healing. And if it would have only just happened, sooner. But,
Right. And we're
hindsight 2020.
breaking the cycle, right? You're going to be a different parent to your children because of the work that you're doing on yourself. And that's very inspiring and wonderful to see. And I think from what you're doing with your podcast, you want to spread that to as many people as you possibly can. And that's what I want to do with my books and talking.
And it's very interesting you say that because then it would really help the young grandparents or the older grandparents that if you see this and you have unresolved traumas, then you can be a better grandparent by not, because I've heard, who was it? I think it was, I saw it on an interview where it said, the person said, When you look at your grandkids, you think and raise them and work with them, and if you're okay, like, wow, that's how I should have treated my kids. And it speaks volumes because a lot of grandparents really need to get curious about saying, hey, I've been through a lot of stuff. I may not have told anyone, even if I don't want to tell anyone. Let me see what a therapist can help me kind of clear up. And they will see the change, the confidence, and how they approach even their own family members. So I hope they do get curious about that.
And I think anybody, grandparents, parents, siblings, people in your workspace, anybody who does any kind of healing work, I think it ripples out because you become a different way in the way that you relate to other human beings. And you never know. We may never know the ripple effect that we have, and that's okay. But I think it's good to know that there is a ripple effect.
And if you put your best foot forward and it's positive, it's always a good ripple effect. Yeah, you're right. How do unhealthy family dynamics ripple out to create larger patterns of division, hostility, or even violence in our communities and country?
Well, I talk a lot about that in my book, America in Therapy, and there's a lot of ways, but I'm going to zero in on one big way because I think it's really of concern in our country and really around the world today. So, I worked with hundreds of people over the years, and I have my own story, right? And I read lots of books on sexual abuse in particular because that was my trauma. But I think all trauma at human hands in some way has a similar effect. So what I saw is that regardless of what your story is, because everybody has a different story, but the patterns are similar of the outcomes. When people don't have a chance to heal from abuse, there's two main ways that they end up functioning. And again, there's no one size fits all, but these are the patterns, the big patterns that I saw. And they are either learned helplessness or becoming identified with the aggressor. So many people's response to abuse is to freeze because it's so unsafe to resist. It might cause more harm or pain or assault if you try to protect yourself or speak out or do anything to protect yourself, that you actually learn that being helpless is your best shot at survival. And that learned helplessness doesn't necessarily go away when you leave home and you go out into the world. For other people, there's some, and I don't know why it's different for different people, but I've just seen these two patterns emerge. They'll do anything not to be helpless and vulnerable. And so they end up identifying with the aggressor and becoming aggressive and often becoming abusers or bullies or very angry people themselves. And these patterns continue if there's no intervention, if the cycle doesn't get broken, if people don't get a chance to get help. And many people are in some sort of, some dysfunctional way, are rewarded for being passive or rewarded for being aggressive. And so those two outcomes and those two patterns of behavior get reinforced. And unfortunately, they're like magnets to each other. I can't tell you the number of people that I've worked with whose parents either had this dynamic or they're in the dynamic themselves, where one of the partners is passive and helpless and the other one is highly aggressive and dominating. And it's just like moth to flame because someone who's identified with the aggressor is looking for someone they can dominate. And someone who has learned to be helpless is attracted to what they know, which is being dominated. And if you look societally at what's going on in our country, and I think in many countries around the world, but I'm most familiar with America, I think we have growing populations of people who are unhealed, who are becoming more and more easily controlled, and those who want to control in very dysfunctional and sometimes lethal ways. And this is of great concern, and I really wanted to point this out as one of the many things that I think we are looking at here in America today, because this helplessness and identification with the aggressor and getting off on having power over other people that is not checked is causing so much suffering. And our children are seeing this. These are the role models that they're witnessing in the news and around the world and in the media. And for me, it's horrifying and very, very of concern.
And you highlight the importance of interrupting cycles of violence and divisiveness. What are the first steps practically and or emotionally that individuals and families can take towards true healing?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is acknowledging that there's a problem. Not trying to hide the pain, not trying to hide, anything behind closed doors, but really acknowledging that there is a problem and seeking some kind of help, whatever it is. And for me, I feel like because I look at America as a family, one of the things that I would like to see, it's not happening yet, is that much of our resources be really devoted to helping people and families, helping people earn a living wage, making therapy available for anybody, medical care, education, rather than investing in weapons and some of the ways that some of our billions of dollars are being spent that just are murderous. In the world of psychology, we know that violence begets violence, and we haven't seemed to gotten there as a society. And I'm not sure why. But yeah, I think asking for help and and this is another thing for me that I'll just say, we're not there yet at all. But I think what's really important is to make it safe for people to say, I did something harmful. Because right now we just vilify people. We don't look for the victim inside the perpetrator. We don't invest millions and billions of our tax dollars in restorative justice to help people who have committed crimes, who probably were victims themselves at some point, or many of whom have been. We need to make it safe for people to own their mistakes. Not necessarily that they shouldn't be accountable for them or held responsible. I don't mean that. But that there's an essential person inside of them that's underneath what happened to them. There's a beautiful man, I think his name is Brian Stevenson, and he works with the criminal population. And he made this statement that I really love. And what he said was, no one is the worst thing they've ever done. An essential, beautiful, innocent little infant that was born into this world that became that person because of whatever happened to them and whatever they were exposed to. And many, many people are actually redeemable. They can be helped. They can serve their time or take the responsibility for what they did and return to society as contributing, helpful members of our society if we want that. So to make it safe for people, I don't know about you, but I've made lots of mistakes in my life. I've done things that were hurtful. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to. I don't think I'm an essentially bad person. I think I'm very loving in many, many ways. But out of my own unconscious wounding, I've been hurtful. And I think we all have. I think if most people, if they really search their soul, they're not just a victim. They've also been on the other side of the fence in some way. And I think we have to really have compassion for that whole structure if we're ever really going to heal as a society. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what I wanted to say.
And I love the response, and trust me, there is no wrong answer, especially with that. And I totally get that because I was having some issues with my father and the dynamic that we have or actually don't. And, a friend told me one time, they said, look, I know you're going through this stuff and thank you for expressing that. Just understand you're not him. You're not him. You're not all the things. So you need to process what you're going through, but that's not you. And all the things that you feel towards him, yes, you got to process it. You got to deal with it. You got to do what you can to alleviate that. If you're not going to do that with him, then do it with yourself.
Right.
But you are not him.
Right.
And yeah, I'm the same way. I've made tons of mistakes, tons. And it's true. I had this discussion with my wife. It's like, okay, we're going through our thing, and it came up. I said, it just hit me. I said, you know how many times I had out of the 15 years we've been together, 15 plus, I said, you know how many times I had to relearn you? And couples don't get that. They don't understand that. You have to relearn a person every couple of years, especially if they're going through something. And I had to relearn you through this. I had to relearn you through that. You were going through this, and you think you were this, and you believed in this. And we're just going through this whole thing, one thing after another. And it's like, you know how many times I had just to make sure that I said, I don't even know if you realize how many times you had to relearn me, even though, I'm 47. I'm not who I was in my 30s. I'm not who I was in my 20s or my teens. And yes, you may had to relearn who I am, but I stayed steady most of it. And it's a dynamic that couples dealing with themselves and healing between themselves need to understand that, hey, you're with somebody for a long enough time, they're not who they were when you met them in their teens, in their 20s. So relearning someone is very vital for having a stable relationship,
Yeah.
or at least an understanding one.
Well, something that you're saying that I find really beautiful, and I think we almost never talk about in our society, is that we're really pretty self-focused. I mean, even the best of us are pretty self-focused. It's the love I want. It's the understanding I want. It's the voice I want to have be heard. It's the things I want to get out of life. And I think one of the beautiful effects of doing your own healing work is you begin to realize that everybody wants that. And when you're in a partnership, you openness that becomes possible to actually take in the other person's reality, hopefully as valid as your own. But we strive in that direction anyway, to really take in the other person's reality and not just see them as a reflection of, am I getting what I want out of this relationship? It's also, are they getting what they want? Are they getting the love they want from me? Are they getting the affirmation they deserve? Are they getting the attention? Are they getting the deep understanding that I want for myself? And one of the reasons why I feel like our country needs therapy so badly is that we condone as a country, not necessarily as each individual, doing things to other people that we would never want to have be done to ourselves. And that's a mental health issue that we're being sold as an ideological or a partisan issue, and it's not. It's a sign of really poor mental health. And so I think the healing process in your own life, you say relearn your wife, but it's another way of saying that might be that as you do your own personal work, you're more and more open to who she is.
Yeah, you have to, because when I broke out of that sort of way of thinking, and it does, is like, are they getting it? And then is the next sentence in your head, am I providing it? And a lot of people don't, they think that stuff is getting pulled from them. When no, that's something that you should be willing to give selflessly.
And most of us didn't grow up with that training, so we had to learn it ourselves.
I certainly did
Still
not.
learning.
I certainly did not.
Still learning. Still learning.
Can you discuss the intersection between emotional healing and spiritual development? And where do you see these processes supporting one another?
Yeah, I think I actually have come to believe, and this is my personal opinion from where I am right now, but I have come to believe that they go together. That if you're really unhealed on an emotional, psychological level, that it's hard to, it doesn't mean you can't have a great spiritual experience or be a devout person in a church or meditate. But what I've witnessed in people is that they go, the more you can heal the emotional part, the healthier spiritual life you have. And I think a good example of where that isn't the case that might really illustrate that is that we take our unhealed wounds everywhere. So we take them to our families, we take them to our parenting, we take them to the workplace, we take them to school, we take them to our houses of worship also, and our spiritual practices. And because we can't help it, we just are who we are. So if someone has an unhealed wound from what happened to them in their early conditioning of abuse or neglect or some kind of dysfunction, and what they did was identify with the aggressor as a way to survive, I hope I can say this without it sounding blaming, because I really think we come by our dysfunction honestly, even when it's terribly hurtful. If someone has identified with the aggressor, they may be someone who is attracted to a spiritual or religious practice that's very dominating, very judgmental, very punishing. And so then those two worlds come together and their psychological wounds are mixed up with their spiritual or their religious beliefs. And I think that's very dangerous. And I think that's happening in our country today, unfortunately, in many places.
Yeah, and that beginning statement, it's where it's I think people think it's the other way around, where you have to be good spiritually and then the rest will follow.
I think there's a place for that. I think if you really do experience some presence of really deep love and wisdom that's non-judgmental and ultimately compassionate but wise from a spiritual point of view, I think it can help you heal. But I think sometimes the psychological healing just has to happen on its own venue.
And it's funny because well, it's interesting because I had an interview with a good friend of mine who was on my healing retreat. His name is Samuel Johnson, and we did an episode on spiritual bypassing, and that was very interesting. And he's a licensed therapist in Pennsylvania, and that whole topic was great because since he was so into religion, he is doing therapy for those as well who are, deeply in their religion. And he's like, you can't do that. You can't do that. You have to balance it very properly, or you're going to be those ones seething underneath the calm waves of your religious beliefs. And he's like, it's not possible. It's not sustainable.
Right. I think actually spiritual bypass is a form of denial. That's really what it is. And that's a psychological issue. So, and I had a beautiful experience. I worked as a co-director of a sexual abuse treatment program when I first graduated from graduate school. And one of the parts of my job was to interview people who wanted to be in our adult survivor group. And I had this beautiful man come in for the interview. And he had just left a monastery. He had been in a monastery for many years. And he came to our program because he said, I finally realized that I couldn't do it that way. I had to deal with my sexual abuse. And that was just a really beautiful story of like him realizing that there was no way around. You just have to go through.
And it's great to just hit the little places here and there to just add a stone to your growth. And you always have to do that. Like, I'm in therapy again now. I've did my retreat with my release and all these other little things, and I'm seeing that it's growing little by little. And it's not a one thing, one size fits all. I know people who think, okay, I'm going through this and I'm paying for this and I'm good. Like, we look at them, no, you're not. Like, dude, you need therapy. You need therapy. Getting a good coaching and everything like that is great to a certain extent, but if they're not a licensed therapist and they're not getting down to the nitty gritty with you along with coaching you in your life as a hand in hand thing, like, dude, you got to hit this from more than one angle.
Right. And I think the proof is really in how are you in relationship? How are you with other people and yourself? I've had clients who were meditators and whatever, and they were also ragers.
That's a weird balance. You said that healing personal trauma opens the door to compassion and connection. How has this been true in your own life and in those you've worked with?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And I just want to say that, like, I think healing is a lifelong journey. I don't say I'm arrived. I don't feel arrived. I'm always learning more about myself and about how to be more in tune with what I believe to be the way I want to be in the world, a loving, compassionate, kind person. But yes, I feel like before I did any healing work, I wasn't a loving, compassionate person. I was really critical of other people. I tried to hide it, like I tried to act like I was a loving person sometimes, but I didn't feel it. And it was really just a reflection of what I felt about myself. And I think that's one of the real gifts of psychotherapy is that you really learn that what is unhealed in you, you project onto other people. So if you have a lot of self-hatred and a lot of criticism and a lot of, feelings of not belonging, it's really almost like predictable that you're going to be critical of other people and maybe not include them, maybe not allow them to belong either. So I think doing my own healing work, it's just night and day almost. And again, it didn't happen overnight. It was a process for sure. And still, like I said, it's still happening. I still see layers of things that I can do better. But But I think going through really being in a safe place and allowing myself the vulnerability to release a lot of pain and self-hatred, and it was a lot. There was a lot of self-hatred in there. Really made me feel so much more compassion for what other people go through. And I really feel like being hurt by other people, and especially when you're little, when you're just absorbing what everything that is around you, you don't have any filters to keep it out, is really devastating. And it just gives me so much compassion for the devastation that other people go through. I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in Gaza right now, or Ukraine, or to be a minority person in the United States. It's devastating. And then we just expect people to show up and look good and function. And I think that's just a horrible injustice.
Yeah, you see those type of people speaking to them, and it's like they're just vibrating in a weird way right underneath their skin. You know, I've seen that at an early age, and now that you mention it's like I didn't really recognize it until I got older when, you know, living in the South Bronx in the 80s, 90s, the 2000s, and seeing what was going through that I went to school with, and then seeing what they're doing, and then one thing after another, and then you see them down the line, and it's like, okay, I moved up, I got a home, I got my family, you know, dealing with my own things, and see them, and then I'm like, you okay? You good? And they're just like, you know, just and like you see, like, yeah, I'm good. I'm like, okay, and
And you know
that
it, right?
and it's a conversation that probably would take God knows how long. And then are they even receptive into, because I'm in a different mind state, so I would love to help, but then you kind of look and know that they don't look like, I don't think they're ready. You know, and it just seems way more than what I'm able to handle. And then, but then giving them grace and say, you know what, they're on their journey. They're on their journey, and if it's something that they don't want to keep going through, something will intervene and do that. Will it be me down the line? Who knows? Will it be somebody else? It's just weird, and you need to know when and how to step in. And it's, yeah.
And I think in addition, I agree with you completely. We haven't created an environment as a country, as a world that's healthy for people. And so they're not only surviving maybe the dysfunction or abuse and neglect in their own families, but they're trying to survive a world that may not even want to receive them or provide them with any kind of opportunity. I was a Vista volunteer in the South Bronx a long, long time ago, and I don't know what the South Bronx is like now, but it was rough.
It's okay.
It was really rough when I was there, and I don't know how anybody survived what I saw.
And that's interesting. Like, where around in the South
I
Bronx?
think it was 52nd Street. There was a program called Vista, which was like the Peace Corps in the United States at the time. I don't think it exists anymore. And it was just a summer program that I was a volunteer in. And the program closed off certain streets and made them play streets for children. And we just provided, play opportunities for kids. There was massive addiction, heroin addiction and violence, racial stuff. And they placed us with different families. There were a lot of Puerto Rican families in the place where I was. And I mean, it was basically a Puerto Rican neighborhood. And they placed us in homes with people who, I guess they paid to keep us for the summer. And me and another woman were in one home. And at the end of the summer, the 13-year-old boy had OD'd from heroin. I mean, and it was, many of those kids had never seen grass. So like that to me that's a national issue. We have to provide a healthy environment for people or they're going to be symptomatic, period.
Yeah, it felt so weird when we got our home. My wife and I couldn't sleep. Like, I used to live by 163rd and Southern Boulevard, right there. And then we moved down to 149th Street. I kind of know the area you're talking about. And, you know, my wife's Dominican, I'm Puerto Rican. And when we moved, we couldn't sleep. It was so quiet. We were actually I think the first week we were driving up, and my son, he looks out, he's looking from the back seat, and he goes, I think somebody lost a rabbit. I'm like, what are you talking about? So he looks and he points, and we're looking. I'm like, no, buddy, that's a wild rabbit. He's like, wait, what? they're in the street and like, yeah. And then my oldest, we were in the first floor and he's upstairs in his room and he's like, deers. We're like, what? What happened? He's like, there's deers outside. They're just walking and like in the evening, walking down the street. And then we're looking out. We're like, and this is like, these are first for us. And it's so normal for the people around here. And we're like, wow, just to see that.
That's beautiful. Well,
And
that's
it
not
changes perspective.
totally, totally. And that's not what it was like when I was on 152nd Street. It was like
No.
burned out cars on the street, buildings that had been demolished, but the rubble never taken away. Children who were 2-year-olds walking on the street who nobody was watching. I mean, it was scary, really scary.
I remember, yeah, playing in those lots. We had a few by where we lived on, or was it like Ho Ave, like right off of the Hunts Point train station. When they started developing it, then that was our playground, an abandoned lot where they tore down a building, go jumping on the mattresses, seeing like dead dogs and all these other things, and it was normal to us as long as we had each other, we had fun as a group of kids, and that was a normal that no one should go through.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Throughout your career, what skills or paradigm shifts have you seen as most essential in moving from pain and division towards wholeness and unity?
I have a whole section of my book is about the paradigm shifts, actually, that I think we're moving toward if we make it, but that I think most people don't necessarily think about or embrace. And there's many. And one of the big ones, there's several. One of the big ones is that I think human beings are wired to be competitive. It's part of survival, actually, to do it better, to do it faster, whatever it is, find the better cure for something, or grow your crops, more efficiently, or whatever it is. I think competition is healthy, but I think we live in a world today where competition is also out of control. And there's two things that I talk about together: competition and cooperation. And I think what the paradigm shift we need is to see competition as safely held within a container of cooperation, so that the competition is for our mutual good, not just for somebody beating somebody else or making more money or having more power or more influence or more sex or whatever it is people are driven to. That I think that's actually critical to human survival, that we begin to hold competition safely within the cooperation for mutual good. And we're not there, and I think that's something that we're really suffering from in this country and in many parts of the world. So that's a big one. Another one is, and it might sound like we know this, but I think we really need to see each other as equals, and we don't. And we justify a lot of the horrible things that we do to one another because we don't think we're equal. We think that some people are superior and some people are inferior, and then we justify acting out on them or exploiting them or killing them or taking from them because it's justified somehow in our minds that they're not worthy, or they're less than, or they're stupid, or whatever we think. One of the real gifts of psychotherapy is you begin to experience yourself as an equal, and you know that in a healthy relationship, if you're going to have a really healthy, loving relationship, you're equal in value to your wife or your husband or your children or your coworkers or whoever it is you're interacting with. And I think true healing brings you to that place. And one of the symptoms, I think, of our wounds that are unhealed is that we either think we're inferior and allow ourselves to be dominated, or we think we're superior and justify the ways that we mistreat other people. So that essential piece of healing that psychotherapy and good healing work, whether it's spiritual or psychological, offers, really needs to spread out into the way we look at the whole human race. And that's huge. We talk about equality a lot, but how many people actually really feel like they're equal in value? And how many people in our country today feel like they're not equal in value, and that they can't be seen that way, and how much they suffer from that? So those are two big ones, and there's more, but those are two really important ones.
If they want more, they got to get the book.
They got to get the book.
And It's interesting that you bring that up because when my wife, in a good way, ambushed me with an interview for my podcast, I already came to the realization, but I was able to explain it to her there. It's like, and which got myself on a sort of level field because I said, I'm not racing anybody. There's a question that came up about what are you trying to do or be better or something like that, or I don't know how it came up. And I'm like, I'm not in competition with anybody. I'm not racing anybody. I'm doing my own thing. I'm doing my own thing because if I think that in competition with someone, then that's gonna make me act a different way.
Hmm.
Everything that you're saying. So it's like, I don't even want to be in competition with myself. I don't want to be in competition with how was the last interview? We got to make this one better and so on and so forth. I said, I'm running my own marathon with or without a goal line because if I want to keep this going, I don't have a goal. I just have continued interviews, continue spreading whatever word and message that, I am narrowing down from when I started to where I'm going. And to see that, instead of seeing the trees, I'm actually seeing the forest. And I love expanding my view. I love
Yeah.
talking to individuals like you with different perspectives, from somebody who's, say you said you were in New Mexico, talk to somebody from Tennessee, talk to somebody from Hawaii. And even though I never been in these places, and to see the perspective of what someone's going through with where they're at, where they're from, and where they're going, competition to me it almost feels like an illusion.
Hmm.
If you really think of it, when you get to a certain place, it's like, dude, I don't need to compete with you. I don't. I
Right.
don't. We're not doing this. We don't have the same life. We're not doing the same thing. And even if we were doing the same thing, let's make each other better. What's the saying? The rising tide lift all boats.
Mm.
We're right there next to each other. If we make each other, God,
Yeah, I think that's a great example from your own life of what I was just talking about competition and cooperation. And I think a lot of competition is driven by if I win, I'm going to be loved. And actually, though that's not necessarily the case at all. It's like if I cooperate, if we're in this together, I'm going to feel loving and loved.
yeah, there's been so many people who I've talked to that they either have been on my podcast, and these are because like how anything, when you're starting something new, you lean on those closest to you. So I lean on a lot of friends and extended family members, and then some of them will come to me. It's like, oh, you're doing this. I was thinking of doing it. I'm not, there's no secret sauce to hold on to. I would give them advice. I would see some take off with it. Others, nothing. I thought you were going to do this. I'm checking in on you. What's up? It's nothing. But then I have a friend of mine who asked me for like, what equipment should I get? This or that, just grilling me on that. We have a meeting tomorrow. And he took my recommendation. He's, starting alongside with what he's doing in his business, he's doing a companion podcast to go with it. I said, that's great. He came to me for advice. He's like, you're the podcaster among the group, among our community and everything. I would love to pick your brain about it. All right, cool. Let's do this. And not holding on to that and just helping them out, because then I think you mentioned something about planting seeds. Like, my wife does that all the time with people she meets. And next thing you know, it's like this person may have something for her, this or that. And I said, look, you're an unknowing, gardener planting seeds. And sometimes you reap from it. Other times you see them growing from maybe they took some advice of yours.
Right. And I think when you begin to move out of that competitive mindset, you can be really happy for other people planting their seeds and growing their tree and being successful. So you don't have to be the only podcaster in your community. You can celebrate somebody else being inspired and wanting to do their own version. And I think that takes some work on oneself, not to feel that kind of competition and need to be top dog.
It does. One interview I did with her name's Anovi. She was on my podcast because she was discussing she was my addiction episode. And she was going through a painful addiction, her life and everything that she expressed from it. And then after doing that, I said, dude, the way you speak, how you handle yourself and everything, and how you relate everything, you need to start a podcast. And then she did. And I actually got to grill her to see if she keeps
Wow.
going on with it. And, she did that. And I listened to her first episode. I'm like, I was over the moon. Oh my God. I flipped out. I'm like, I sent her a voice message. I'm like, yes, this is amazing. Keep this going because the emotion, the expression, and everything. And I'm like, I said, you got me hooked on the first episode. Keep doing it. So I gotta double check to make sure she is, and if she isn't, I'm gonna make sure she is.
Good for you. No, that's beautiful, and I think that that's an illustration of so many things that we're talking about. And it's because it's also equality. She's just as valid in her world with what she's doing as you are in yours, and me and mine, and everybody else. And really, that is actually what connects people. And we're dying for connection, real connection in this world. And people are suffering because they don't know how to get it and they haven't had it.
An interesting question that kind of brings up, what can somebody do if they get addicted to connection? And they rely on that. What are the negative sides of that they can you can kind of warn them against, that if they see it happening, all right, now it's time to pull back a little bit and reevaluate.
Well, I think what you're referring to really is where you're coming from in the connection. There's healthy adult connection, and there's connection that's sort of like codependency, or a more childlike relying on other people, or people pleasing, and just coming from insecurity. And that's not the same thing as healthy adult connection. And I think our personal growth is helping us develop more. You're still your own self. You have a sense of, not necessarily that you're, I would say, wholeness, or confidence in yourself, or the healing that brings just a more solid sense of yourself, so that what you're giving and receiving in relationship feeds your adulthood and feeds the other person's adulthood. It doesn't feed our wounding and our sort of child dependence on one another. And that's not to say that if someone is coming from that sense of addicted to connection from a more childlike, wounded place, that it's wrong or bad, but it doesn't heal the wound. And I think that that's probably the bottom line, because then it's a dependency that can easily turn into hatred if it's not met. So it's a very different thing.
So they have to be kind of cognizant of the imbalance, and if how can they, because some people, if they're really too far deep into it and don't see it as such, what would be an indicator to say, hey, look, step back, reevaluate, and so that it might be going there or it might not? Because a lot of people kind of think like, no, we're working off of each other, we're doing this, we're doing that, but then it ends up being a codependency, but they can't see it.
You mean, is your question like what wakes a person up to realizing that?
In a sense, yeah. Like, how can they, I guess, like, kind of self-evaluate to be like, okay, is this codependency? Is this, something negative where we're supposed to be working off of each other, but then, okay, no, it's not, once they reevaluate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I know the full answer to your question, but one of the things that it makes me think of is, if it's really a codependent relationship, it actually doesn't feel that good. You might think it's meeting a need, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't fill the empty space that just really needs to be healed inside of a person, which is what addiction is about, right? It's trying to fill some empty space that actually needs to be healed. So I think if a person really tunes in, they know that if they are willing to, they know somewhere inside that it doesn't feel good. And chances are the people that they're drawing to themselves, who they have a codependent relationship with, are not entirely healthy, because they're also cooperating in a codependent relationship. So they're getting some less than healthy need met by being in that. And a lot of relationships are characterized by that. And it doesn't mean that the relationship is a failure, but it means that there might be some work that could up-level it to a more adult, healthy place.
I think that was an excellent answer. I think listeners might hear what I'm trying to relay, but I think you answered it really well.
Thank you.
So continuing on, if listeners want to begin repairing a relationship or contribute to broader healing, what practical steps or mindset changes would you recommend?
if they want to heal more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
repairing a relationship and stuff.
I think you start with where it's not working. You know, if there's a lot of friction, if there's distancing, if there's a lot of blame, or if you just, you find yourself having the same argument over and over and over again and it never gets resolved. I think you just really start with what's not working. But I think one of the gifts of good psychotherapy is also that it highlights your strengths. So don't forget that you have strengths in there too. We're not all just wounded. Most of us have strengths somewhere. We're loving by nature, or we tend to be good listeners when we're not totally triggered. But don't be afraid to say, this isn't working. When we have this argument about the same thing about money or sex or parenting or what we do with our social life or whatever it is, if we're in a pattern that we can't break, there's probably something stuck in both of us that needs healing. And sometimes I know as a therapist, when I've worked with couples, sometimes there's a place for really working on the communication between the two people and making that safe and making it productive. And sometimes there's a place for one or both people to go off and do a little bit of individual work on their own contribution to the stuck place. But I think it's really having the courage to say, this piece isn't working.
Thank you for that. And thank you for everything. And wrapping up, where can listeners find your books, connect with you, or get started with the tools you share for both personal and collective transformation?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. All of my books, A Light in the Darkness, Into the Fire, and America in Therapy, are all wherever you buy books, from all the major booksellers, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Goodreads, Amazon, all of those places. I have a website, which is my name. It's www.phyllisleavitt.com, and I have lots of interviews on there and blogs on there and information about my books on there. And I'm on all the social media, LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook, and I have lots of videos on YouTube. And you can just contact me if you want to at phyllis@phyllisleavitt.com, and I'm happy to engage with anybody. I'm not in practice anymore, so I don't see clients. I'm really focused on writing and speaking. But if you're really looking for therapy, I can refer you to somebody you can see online.
Yes, that's awesome. I'll make sure to have all your stuff available, so if anyone's interested. And thank you very much for your time, your wisdom, and love it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have really enjoyed talking with you. You're fabulous. I love the focus of your podcast. I love your sincerity, and you're just being like your true self, which is really what we need to have permission to show up as our true selves.
Yeah, because this has been showing me, since I've been ramping it up, this has been showing me a lot about myself and a lot of where I want to put my heart into and get past any sort of lack of discipline, lack of motivation, which I do. It's less now than it was before, but before it was so bad. It was so bad. And to the point where it's like I don't want to do this anymore, but then it's like something in my head, the way I told you how the way the podcast came to me, but then something in my head is like, you got to continue, you got to go. Don't let it go, don't let it go. I've done so many things before that has just, gone by the wayside, and then I'm like, okay, there's something here. And I hope people can find that within themselves and what they do, that if it's something that you really can't let go, you have to break those barriers of lack of motivation, of discipline, of lack of discipline, and all those other factors that get what is in your heart moving forward. Get past the pain of that trauma and what you're doing for yourself. Excuse my language, but fuck whatever happened to you. And, I worked through my trauma. I was able to release. And people need to know that, okay, fuck what happened to you, but do your best to forgive yourself. When I learned how to forgive myself,
Mhm.
and I forget the name of the book, but it's like Walking Through the Castle, I think it was, or something like that, that a friend recommended to me. And it's just like, you have to learn to, when you forgive yourself and not the what the person has done to you or the trauma has done to you, it makes a difference.
Yeah, it's
And it's
really,
another step to getting better.
yeah. And I don't know anybody, including myself, who doesn't have a real calling like you're experiencing who doesn't experience moments of, I don't want to do this. I think it is part of the journey. And I think the calling becomes louder and we listen better. But sometimes, sometimes it's just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And who knows why that is? We have a naysayer inside of us. But I really do believe that the more you listen to it, the easier it is to get through those places.
And I'll leave this on a note, and if you want to give a final reflection, I would love to hear it. And what you just said is that I'm fortunate. One, I'm fortunate to do this. Not that I have to do this, but I get to do this. And and I'm so glad, I've never had a moment where I'm like, oh, I got to do this interview. Oh, I got to do this. I have so many lined up from this service and where we discovered each other. And I'm like, oh wait, and I have to tell my wife, like, hope she doesn't get mad. It's like, I got an interview today. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I got an interview. And it never hit me to be like, oh, I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to speak to this person. There was an individual who I interviewed before you, and he wrote on the booking page, he's like, no one is truly damaged. So I'm like, I didn't take offense to it. I'm like, okay, this might be interesting. I don't know if he has an issue with how I name my podcast or whatever. He didn't, but it's just something he believes. It was very interesting, and I'm glad that I'm realizing that for myself, and it's helping me put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because I think in our essential selves we're whole and pure, and we've just been covered over by layers of poor conditioning, and they can be taken off.
That's actually something he said too. He's like we were born pure. Like, he said something like exactly in the same vein. And I have somebody that's close to me as well. This, same thing. How you said, somebody who committed trauma or committed an act and caused trauma in someone is like, they were born pure. They weren't born like that. And to really understand that, even though somebody who I don't want to understand somebody that hurt me, but that's the beginning of your healing journey.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And this is one of my better episodes. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your insight and everything that you've given, in this hour and 19 minutes.
Thank you so much for having me, because it really is my passion to share everything that has been given to me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Have a great evening, and I'll let you know when the episode comes out.
Be well.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
If you're here at the end of our conversation, pace your next steps, because what Stephanie shared wasn't just design talk. It was a reminder that healing doesn't always begin in your mind. Sometimes it begins in the personal spaces around you. Her story, from the starving artist years to discovering holistic healing, to realizing that safety and nervous system peace are the foundation of human growth, shows us something powerful. Your environment is either supporting your life or it's silently sabotaging it. When she spoke about neurodivergent families, about parents who had given up their boundaries, about children who need agency and adults who need to feel like themselves again, she wasn't just talking about design. She was talking about dignity, about identity, about the subtle ways we lose ourselves inside spaces that overwhelm us, and the quiet miracles that happen when we reclaim said spaces. And if anything you heard today made you look around your own home differently, good, because you deserve a space that reflects your story, your culture, your nervous system, and your peace. You deserve a sanctuary. Not someday, not when your life gets easier, but starting with one small daily shift starting today. So take Stephanie's advice. Find the one object, color, texture, or memory in your space that makes you feel good, and give it room to breathe. Let that be the first step in rebuilding your environment, and maybe even rebuilding yourself. Until next time, keep choosing spaces that love you back. This is FYI, I am damaged. If there's one thing Phyllis gave us today, it's permission. Permission to stop pretending we're fine, permission to step out from behind the emotional mask we learned as kids, and permission to finally say, this part of my life isn't working, without the shame. She reminded us that healing doesn't require perfection, just honesty, that we're wired for love and connection, and that when those needs get injured, our defenses can look like withdrawal, criticism, people-pleasing, or even becoming the overachiever who can't sit still. But she also reminded us of something brighter, that healing creates compassion, that doing your work makes you more open to the people you love, more curious, more generous, more willing to relearn each other as life changes and seasons shift. And she reminded us that every small healing choice ripples outwards, to your spouse, your kids, your coworkers, your community. Even when you don't see it happening, you're already planting seeds of change. So if something in this episode nudged you, follow that. Maybe get curious about therapy. Maybe soften towards yourself. Maybe set one boundary or have one honest conversation. Start whenever you can. Adelante, siempre por tu mente. Forward, always for your mind. This is the FYI I Am Damaged podcast. Meet Logan, the strong-minded little elephant who learns that bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about believing in yourself even when you're scared. In this beautifully illustrated story, friends follow Logan through a colorful jungle as he learns to calm his worries, take deep breaths, and remind himself, I am strong, I am safe, I can do this. It's a story that helps kids, and maybe a few grown-ups too, find courage, mindfulness, and strength in their hearts. Logan, the strong-minded little elephant, by me, Oscar Luna. Available now at all major retailers and my publisher's bookstore, Milton and Hugo. Because it's up to every parent to show that their child deserves to know that strength starts from within.